In Philip Roth's novel, The Plot Against America, the United States becomes a pro-Nazi state after the aviation hero Charles Lindbergh wins the 1940 election. It's a story that taps into our deep-seated fascination with playing make-believe with the past. But for a political scientist or a historian, asking what if serves a more practical purpose. They use these scenarios as a diagnostic tool called counterfactual history. This method helps us identify deterministic bias. It's our natural tendency to look at the past and assume that massive events were completely unavoidable, simply because they happened. Simulating a different past allows us to weigh the influence of a single choice against the momentum of a century. If we want to test the stability of our modern world, we have to start on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo. This single afternoon acted as the catalyst for almost everything that followed. The global order shifted that day because of a fragile sequence of errors. A chauffeur driving this Grafenstift touring car took a wrong turn, stalling the vehicle in the middle of a crowded street. That stall happened directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, who used the opportunity to fire the shots that ignited the Great War. For our simulation, we are going to delete that assassination from the timeline. We want to see which modern structures would have fallen apart without it, and which ones would have stood on their own. To keep this analysis rigorous, we have to follow the rules of the subjunctive past. This means we can only explore alternatives that were actually plausible to the people alive in 1914. The Archduke surviving Sarajevo is a highly plausible scenario. Earlier that morning, a bomb intended for his car bounced off the folded roof and exploded in the street. The assassination nearly failed multiple times. While we often imagine Europe was a powder keg, this man, Franz Ferdinand, was actually the most powerful voice for peace in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, consistently blocking his own generals from starting a war. With the Archduke alive and the peace party in power, the Great War is no longer a certainty. The path is clear to run the simulation and watch the dominoes fall. In this version of the 20th century, the Russian monarchy avoids the extreme military strain that historically broke its economy. Without the losses of the Great War, the Tsar's regime maintains its grip on power. Without that total economic collapse, the Bolsheviks lose the public despair they used to seize control. The Soviet Union never appears on our timeline. We then look to Germany. Without a crushing defeat, there is no Treaty of Versailles and no hyperinflation to ruin the middle class. Without that specific post-war grievance and economic misery, the political oxygen required for Adolf Hitler's rise completely evaporates. When we remove that initial trauma, the regimes that followed lose their foundation. It highlights how much of our modern reality was built on the back of a single, localized failure. However, the simulation also reveals that some forces are too deep to be moved by a single assassination. Spain still descends into a brutal civil war. The internal ideological hatreds between its citizens existed independently of the geopolitics in Sarajevo. Global modernization continues, but it moves at a much slower pace. Without the desperate funding of a world at war, breakthroughs in jet engines and computers take decades longer to materialize. And we still see China centralizing power along its major waterways. This development is driven by the inescapable realities of geography and demographics, rather than a random choice by a European driver. These surviving structures show us the limits of the Archduke's influence. Large-scale forces like geography and regional friction operate on a track that random accidents simply cannot reach. We can now end the simulation and return to the history we actually know. Real history is a collision. It is a world where slow-moving structural forces grind together, creating the conditions for change, but the actual explosions are often triggered by highly volatile, random human accidents. Viewing history through this lens changes our perspective on the present. It suggests our current world is just one of many possible outcomes. While deep tectonic forces guide our path, the world can still pivot on a single choice, like turning a steering wheel in 1914.